Thank you. Thank you for two wonderful presentations, and thank you for inviting me to campus. I'm Brad Lefton, and I have had the pleasure of being a journalist working in baseball, Japanese baseball, American baseball, for a career. And it really struck me listening to Sayuri and Derek speak that I had the opportunity a year ago to visit Gorham, Maine, and the very farmhouse that Horace Wilson was born in, and his descendants still live in that farmhouse. And to think that somebody who lived in that home 150, 200 years ago, it's been in their family for over 200 years, is responsible for crossing the Pacific Ocean and helping to introduce baseball to Japan. And then, of course, I guess it's even more appropriate that I carried my notes today in my Ichiro file holder. So it just shows you how baseball has really has connected the two countries. I chose as the title of my talk, 50 Home Runs by a Japanese Slugger in America, not yet, but Japan has already influenced baseball in many ways you might not realize. And I chose that because as long as I have been covering the game, that has been the barometer Japan has used to measure its advancement in baseball. Shohei Ohtani hit his 44th home run on August 23rd with 35 games remaining, and the elusive mark seemed within reach. But then an elbow injury abruptly ended his season, and we still haven't seen a 50 home run season by a Japanese player in America. But don't despair, because I'm here to tell you that Japan's influence on American baseball has been profound, and we don't need a 50 home run slugger to make that point. Many people will remember that 1995 was the year that Hideo Nomo became the second Japanese player to come from Japan to American baseball. The first is with us today, Mashi Murakami, and we'll hear from him later. But Murakami-san came in 1964, so there was a 30-year gap. When Nomo came in 1995, the significance of that is that his success with the Dodgers opened the imagination of other players, and we've had a steady stream. 65 players have followed Nomo since 1995 to American professional baseball. But 1995 is also significant for another reason, and a reason that I think often gets very much overlooked. It's also the first time that an American manager who had major league experience was hired to manage a team in Japan. That is Bobby Valentine, who you will also hear from later today. Bobby was hired in 1995, or we should say Bobby accepted an offer to go to Japan in 1995 and manage the Chiba Lotte Marines. Now, you might be wondering, how does an American going to Japan fit into the topic of Japan influencing American baseball? And the answer to that is, it takes somebody of influence to first see and observe and then understand that there are ideas and methods that are worth bringing back, that are to make his team better. And that's exactly what Bobby Valentine did. He went to Japan, he made a lot of observations, he came back, managed the New York Mets, brought a lot of ideas from Japan to the United States, one of which, in 1997, he brought his training and conditioning coach, Ryuji Tachibana, from Lotte to the Mets. And Bobby had been very impressed during his time with Lotte of the advanced ideas that Tachibana had in training and conditioning. And I remember at one time asking Bobby, what is it that is so good about Tachibana? And Bobby said, because he believes in prehabilitation. And I said, prehabilitation? What does that mean? And he said, Prehabilitation is what you do to prevent your players from needing rehabilitation. It is the idea of training and conditioning and preparing the muscles and the body to go out and play, so you don't have to, so you lessen the number of players who get injured and need rehabilitation. And so it might sound like somewhat of a basic concept today, but in 1997, I suppose the training methods were such that it was very revolutionary. And to underscore that point, I would say about half of the major league teams today have at least one Japanese member of their training staff. And particularly impressionable to me are teams like Cincinnati and Miami, Boston, Houston. They have Japanese trainers, but they don't have Japanese players today. And one of the reasons for that is it's very interesting. As you see these Japanese players who come over, you're probably very familiar with the interpreter. Most of them come over from Japan with a dedicated interpreter. But what you might not know is that they also typically bring a trainer with them, because the major league team is investing in a player who's already had many years of success at the highest level, and they want that player to be comfortable here so they can continue to perform at a similarly high level and make a smooth transition, so they typically allow them to bring a trainer with them. But then what happens in the cases that I just gave you, Cincinnati and Miami, Houston, Boston, when the player isn't re-signed, management feels compelled to hold on to the trainer. And so the trainers have stayed with these organizations, and there isn't the Japanese player anymore because the management and the players feel so good about the training that they're getting from these Japanese trainers. And so I think the very first example of that was Bobby Valentine in 1997, bringing Tachibana from Lotte. Do we have any fans of the Phillies and the Guardians in our audience today? Yeah, okay, there's a few. Well, many legendary players from both of those organizations have something in common. I'm talking about Albert Bell, Manny Ramirez, Jim Thome, Ryan Howard, Chase Utley. Each had multiple 30-plus home run seasons. Each hit more than 250 career home runs. Thome and Ramirez had more than 550 home runs. I'm sure you never recognized it, but each of those players has a little bit of Japan's legendary home run king Sadaharu Oh in their swing, even though they never played in Japan. Now, how could that be? Well, it's because they're all disciples of Charlie Manuel, and Charlie Manuel is a hitting guru. Charlie had an undistinguished career in Major League Baseball. Over 6 seasons of limited playing time, he had a career batting average of 198, and he hit only 4 home runs. But then something remarkable happened. He went to Japan in 1996, and somehow his talent was unlocked when he played for the Yakult Swallows and then the Kintetsu Buffaloes. Over a 4-year stretch, Charlie even out-homered the legendary O, 166 to 151 from 1977 to 1980. In Japan, Charlie was a career 303 hitter with an on-base plus slugging percentage of .988. Charlie's first manager with the Yakult Swallows was a man named Hiroshi Arakawa. The significance of Arakawa is that he was O's first hitting coach, or his early hitting coach anyway, and shaped his thoughts on hitting. Arakawa is the one who created O's famous flamingo stance, where as a left-handed batter, he would stand on his back leg. I can't really demonstrate it with the microphone, but as a left-handed batter, he would stand on one leg with his front leg raised, and that's how he would attack the ball. So you can only imagine the kind of balance that would take and the power to stand on one leg and not be thrown off balance. That was called the famous flamingo batting stance, or the ippon ashi daho in Japanese. So Jim Thome and Ryan Howard and the other guys I mentioned, of course, they didn't bat like that, and neither did Charlie in Japan. However, they all used some of the same technique, even though it looked very different. That's because Charlie was majorly influenced by his manager, Arakawa, and by his opponent, O. And I asked Charlie about this one time for an interview, and I'll give you the quote that he gave me. Fortunately, I don't have visual, so you'll have to listen to me try to imitate Charlie. I can't do, nobody can do that. He said, "He taught me how to hit the ball inside, shorten my stride, extend my bottom hand. He taught me to hit middle in, which is my strength. Japanese use their legs real good. They are real strong in their core, especially in their legs. That's what he taught. You see Arakawa and O in Jim Thome, Ryan Howard, Chase Utley, and the others." In other words, O and Arakawa were on to the importance of a strong core for balance and generating power from your legs. In the early 60s, I think that's long before such thoughts were commonplace here. But today, those concepts are commonly accepted. But this is in the 1960s. When Charlie came back from Japan and became a hitting coach and manager, that's how he taught hitting. And all the guys I mentioned were among his greatest pupils. Jim Thome was inducted into the Cooperstown Hall of Fame in 2018, and he devoted a nice part of his speech to praising Charlie, thanking Charlie for the way that he turned him into such a great hitter. And then earlier this year, I ran into Chase Utley at a game, and I asked him, who was the best hitting coach you ever had as a pro? And without hesitation, he said, Charlie by far. Charlie still works as an advisor and a special instructor to the Phillies, and I ran into him at a game last year, and something that I observed at that time really made an impression on me. He was talking to a young infielder who was very attentive to what Charlie was saying. It was impressionable because Charlie will be 80 in January, and the player was in his mid-20s. I think a real challenge in baseball today is how to effectively pass wisdom from older, experienced coaches onto young players, because information is disseminated and processed so differently by the current generation. It's really a challenge for older generations to figure out how to make their message resonate. But in this case, the player really seemed intent on listening to what Charlie had to say. So I asked the player why he seemed so focused on what Charlie was telling him about batting. And he said, because Charlie knows hitting, and when he has something to say, you better listen. I asked if he had ever heard of Sadaharu O, and he said, no, I'm sorry, I haven't. I told him that O is Japan's all-time home run king, and Charlie played against him and learned a lot about hitting by observing him. So if he followed Charlie's advice, then he probably had a little O in him. And he said, I don't know who that is, but if Charlie thinks it's ideas that can work for me, I'm all in. So there you have it, that there's a little bit of Sadaharu O still in many players in American baseball today. Charlie says he would have never managed in the major leagues if he hadn't gone to Japan, because he learned about himself, about discipline, and about hitting in Japan in a way that made him a successful manager here. There's a current manager who feels the same way. However, that manager had a very different experience than Charlie in Japan. While Charlie played 6 seasons, won 2 home run titles, played on the first Yakult championship team in 1978, the other guy played just 29 games for Yakult in 2000. He had only 13 hits in Japan, and he left Japan with a 197 average, and that came after an 8-year major league career. When I learned that this guy had played in Japan so briefly, even so briefly, I still wanted to hear about his experiences. I heard about it in 2017, and that's when I approached him. I was prepared for a very terse response. I imagined that a proud major leaguer who went to Japan and only played 29 games and couldn't even hit 200 would be bitter about his experience and not have good things to say about it. I was completely wrong. He told me it was the greatest experience of his life, and his only regret is that he couldn't perform better so he could have lasted longer. His lack of performance, he said, was all on him. He said it was experiencing how Japanese practiced details in a very detail-oriented game that often got overlooked here that convinced him he wanted to concentrate similarly on details and manage one day. This year, he will certainly receive votes for Manager of the Year. He's already won it once. And for any of you who decide to tune into the World Series that begins tonight in Texas, you'll see him on the opposing bench. He's Tori Lovulo. He managed the Arizona Diamondbacks to their first National League pennant under his stewardship, and their first since. Does that mean that I'm supposed to? Okay. And so, if you have been watching these baseball playoffs, you'll know that the D-backs have one of the game's most exciting young catchers in Gabriel Moreno. As Tori thought over last winter, heading into spring training this year, how to develop the skills of Moreno and his young catching unit, he drew upon his experience in Japan from 22 years ago at Yakult. There he had a teammate who was in the midst of a Hall of Fame career. He was a catcher, and Tori was forever impressed with his skills in blocking balls, game calling, preparation, etc. His name is Atsuya Furuta, and he's one of Japan's all-time great players. But Tori didn't have a special relationship with Furuta over that 1 year. In fact, they hadn't even been in contact for the 22 years since Tori left Japan. But Tori had always remembered the skills that Furuta had as a catcher, and he wanted to tap into that. He thought in the offseason, how could he tap into that? He hadn't been in touch with this guy for 22 years, but he figured out a way to reach out to Furuta and invite him to be a guest instructor in spring training this past year. And so Furuta accepted, and this past February, for a little over 2 weeks, Tori and Furuta were reunited in the Diamondbacks spring training camp, where Furuta imparted his knowledge on Moreno and other catchers and pitchers in the Diamondbacks camp. Tori hopes to have Furuta back again next year for a longer stint. There are countless people, that Tori could have reached out to. It would have been much easier for him to bring in almost anybody, but he remembered the experiences that he had had 22 years ago and the skills of this catcher in Japan, and that's who he wanted as a guest instructor, and he figured out a way to make it happen. I really like this story because there have been many examples throughout my career of Japanese coaches coming to major league camps to learn and observe and bring ideas back to Japan. But this is a unique example of it working the other way. Tori recognized there were fresh ideas from Japan that would benefit his team, and he figured out how to access them, just as Bobby Valentine had done all those years ago in 1997 with Ryuji Tachibana and the Mets. And of course, I would be remiss speaking about influences Japan has had on American baseball without mentioning a little more about Shohei Ohtani, the two-way sensation who just completed his 6th season with the Angels. As a batter, he's the first Japanese home run champion in Major League Baseball history. And as a pitcher, he's typically in the Cy Young conversation. Baseball has never seen an athlete like him, but more significantly for the purposes of this discussion, I think a young generation of American baseball players is being inspired in a way like never before. I don't know if we'll see two-way playing becoming a trend in professional baseball, or if Ohtani will simply go down in history as the rarest of talents. But I do know that Ohtani has inspired many young baseball players in this country and, of course, in Japan, including one right here in the state of Virginia. In July, I had the pleasure of doing a story on a high schooler in Vienna, Virginia. His name is Bryce Eldridge, and Bryce was a senior. He's a tall, strikeout-throwing right-handed pitcher and a power-hitting left-handed batter. The San Francisco Giants drafted Bryce 16th overall in this past summer's draft with a commitment to develop him as a two-way player. Now, there's a long way to go between an 18-year-old drafted out of high school going to the lowest of the minor leagues and making it to the big leagues as a two-way player. But the point is that the player had the dream, is inspired to try to play both ways, and the team is willing to make a commitment to try and develop him that way. Whether it works out or not, we'll see. But I think the point is that both sides had the desire to try and make it happen. But really, the Ohtani story, for the purposes of this discussion, is bigger than just Ohtani inspiring young players. It's also the way that decision makers have been inspired, and it's also the way that decision makers came up with the idea in Japan to try and develop him as a two-way player. And that credit goes to the Nippon Ham Fighters, the team that Ohtani played for before he came to the Angels. When Ohtani was a high school senior, he told Japanese teams not to draft him because he was going to sign as an amateur free agent directly with an MLB team. Nippon Ham defied him and drafted him anyway. Once they drafted him, they then went out and persuaded him to stay by carefully crafting a plan to develop him as a two-way player. He was swayed by their presentation and stayed in Japan. He played 5 seasons as a two-way player in Japan before coming here in 2018. His development as a pitcher outpaced his development as a hitter early on. The two-way experiment was met with lots of skepticism and criticism in Japan. There were calls for the fighters to stop the silliness and just concentrate on developing him as a pitcher. So hats off to the front office executives and the on-field staff of the fighters for ignoring those voices and sticking to the two-way plan for Ohtani. The result is the gift that we all get to enjoy of a two-way player playing in Major League Baseball. And the gift that the fighters gave is inspiring Ohtani to keep doing it, and also to young players to try to do it, and also to adult decision makers to consider the notion. Because I contend that if Ohtani had followed his original plan and not stayed in Japan as an 18-year-old and came to this country and started out in the very low minor leagues, we wouldn't see a two-way player today. There's no way that an American team would have had the resources to develop a two-way player. There's no way that they would have allowed that to happen. And once he showed more of a proficiency at one over the other early on, that's the path that would have been chosen for him. And so hats off to the fighters for coming up with this plan that really inspires not only young baseball players, but also adult decision makers, that there's a world of possibility out there. Whether we get more two-way players in Ohtani, I don't know, but I do know that the fighters have really inspired both sides, the young players and the adult decision makers. So those are just a couple of examples that I have observed over my years as a journalist covering baseball of ways that Japan has influenced America. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Brad. That was fantastic. Thanks to all the panelists, actually, for